The sleeve moved before Hadrian could stop it, not by his will, but by the fearless grip of a child's hand cutting through centuries of carefully constructed invisibility. He froze among the glittering chaos of Christmas shoppers, his immortal instincts screaming danger, but nothing prepared him for what came next. The little girl in pink looked up at him with eyes far too knowing for 6 years of life and spoke a single sentence that tore through his ancient world like dawn through darkness. "Sir, my mom's tattoo matches yours." Impossible. The bond mark burned only on vampire skin, a sacred seal of eternal devotion he had carved into his own flesh 7 years ago for a human woman he loved enough to abandon. No mortal could bear it. No human could survive it. Yet this child stood before him, unafraid, pointing to his forearm with the casual certainty of someone identifying their own name. What happens next will prove that even kings can be brought to their knees by the truth they tried to outrun. Before we continue, let us know in the comment section what time it is and where you are watching from. And remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the story. Now let's continue. Hadrian Talon had not set foot in a human shopping mall in years. It was early December, the shopping mall bathed in golden light and draped in silver garland, the kind of human celebration he observed from the shadows, but never truly belonged to. He had come tonight for reasons he couldn't fully name, drawn by something restless and hungry that immortality couldn't seem to cure. Perhaps it was the peculiar human obsession with December magic. Perhaps it was the dangerous nostalgia of watching people pretend, for one brief season, that light could push back the dark. Or perhaps, and this was the thought he refused to finish, it was because she had loved Christmas, and even after 7 years of forced distance, some part of him still orbited the ghost of her warmth. He moved through the crowd like a shadow dressed in black velvet, his platinum hair catching fluorescent light, his pale skin too perfect to be entirely human. No one looked directly at him. They never did. Centuries of existence had taught him the art of being seen without being noticed, a necessary skill for a vampire king walking among prey. Hadrian had ruled from the darkness for longer than most nations had existed. 347 years of political maneuvering, blood oaths, and the kind of loneliness that accumulated like dust in abandoned halls. The vampire realm operated in the spaces between human awareness, ancient estates hidden behind glamour, councils that met in subway tunnels at 3 a.m., territories carved through cities that never suspected the predators who shaped their skylines. He had never wanted the throne. It had been thrust upon him during a century of chaos, when the old king fell and the realm threatened to tear itself apart. Hadrian had survived by being ruthless when necessary and invisible when possible. He perfected the balance between two worlds, powerful enough to command respect among his own kind, subtle enough to move through human society without leaving ripples. Until Ellie. She had been a mistake from the beginning. A literature professor who quoted poetry in coffee shops, who looked at autumn leaves like they personally offended her with their beauty, who laughed at his carefully constructed formality and called him unnecessarily dramatic. Within an hour of meeting him, he had known better. Every law, every precedent, every cautionary tale whispered through vampire history warned against what he was about to do. But he had loved her anyway. The bond mark was forbidden for good reason. It was older than his reign, older than the current council, a ritual from a time when vampires believed in soul-deep connections that transcended death itself. The process required blood, ancient words, and a level of vulnerability that most of his kind had bred out of themselves centuries ago. Once carved, the mark linked two beings across distance, across time, allowing them to sense each other's emotions, their pain, their presence. He had given it to her in secret, in the stolen hours before dawn, pressing the seal into his own flesh while speaking her name like a prayer. Then the council discovered what he had done. They had given him a choice that wasn't really a choice at all: abandon her, or watch her become a target for every rival who wanted to destroy him through the thing he loved most. So he had disappeared, erased himself from her life completely. Let her believe he had abandoned her rather than explain the danger his love had painted on her back. He thought the mark would fade, eventually. He thought the bond would weaken with distance and time. He had been wrong about many things. The child moved with purpose through the maze of shoppers, weaving between displays of wrapped gift sets and motorized reindeer. Hadrian followed at a distance that would seem casual to human eyes, but allowed him to track her heartbeat through the noise, steady, unafraid, utterly certain of where she was going. His mind cataloged impossibilities with the efficiency of 3 centuries. The bond mark didn't spontaneously appear. It didn't transfer. It certainly didn't replicate itself on another person's skin. Yet this child had recognized it instantly, had known, with the unshakable confidence of the very young, that the mark on her mother's arm matched his own. Megan. He had caught her name when a woman called after her near the toy section, stopped abruptly beside a display of winter coats. She turned and looked back at him with those unsettling eyes, then pointed toward the far corner of the store where dressing rooms lined the wall. "She's over there," the girl said simply, as if introducing a vampire king to her mother in the middle of a department store was the most natural thing in the world. Hadrian's throat tightened in a way it hadn't in decades. He didn't breathe out of necessity, but suddenly the air felt too thick, too warm, too full of cinnamon and artificial pine. Then he saw her. Ellie Walters stood near a mirror, holding a scarf she wasn't really looking at, her dark hair longer than he remembered. She wore a red silk dress that seemed utterly impractical for December shopping, and for a moment he wondered if she had been somewhere else tonight, somewhere that required elegance instead of convenience. She hadn't seen him yet. He could still turn around, disappear back into the crowd, preserve whatever fragile peace she had built in his absence. Then her hand reached up to adjust the scarf. The world reduced itself to a single point of absolute impossibility. There, on her forearm, rendered in the same intricate black lines that marked his own skin, was the bond seal. Every curve exact, every symbol precise. The ancient pattern that shouldn't exist outside of vampire flesh burned into her skin like a brand, like a promise, like a scar that refused to fade. His vision sharpened to predatory focus. He could see the faint shimmer beneath her skin where the mark sat. Not quite human, not quite vampire, something in between that made no sense according to any law he knew. She turned slightly, and he caught her profile. The same delicate features. The same mouth that used to smile at his formal speech patterns. The same woman he had loved enough to destroy his own happiness protecting. Except she was wearing his mark. And she had a daughter who recognized it on sight. Megan tugged at Ellie's dress. "Mommy," she said, loud enough to carry across the space between them. "I found him." Ellie looked down at her daughter with confused affection. "Found who, sweetheart?" "The man with your tattoo." Ellie's expression shifted, amusement fading into something cautious, something that understood her daughter didn't lie about things like this. She followed Megan's pointing finger across the store, past the checkout counters and the rotating jewelry display, directly to where Hadrian stood frozen beneath fluorescent lights that suddenly felt too bright, too exposing, too much like standing in sunlight he couldn't escape. Their eyes met, and Ellie's face went absolutely white. The scarf fell from her hands. For a moment, neither of them moved. The chaos of the shopping mall continued around them, children shrieking near the toy section, someone's phone blaring a ringtone, a cashier calling for a price check. But the space between Hadrian and Ellie existed in a different kind of silence. The kind that came before avalanches. Then her knees buckled. He crossed the distance between them faster than human eyes could properly track, catching her before she hit the polished floor. His hands closed around her arms, and the contact sent a shock through his entire system, the bond mark flaring to life after 7 years of dormant aching. Recognizing its match, singing with a connection that shouldn't be possible. "You," she whispered, and the word came out broken. "You're real." I thought, God, I thought I'd imagined you. People were staring now. A small crowd beginning to form at the edges of their collision, phones emerging from pockets, concerned murmurs rippling outward. Ellie. Her name felt like something sacred and damning all at once. "I need you to breathe." But she wasn't breathing. She was staring at him like he was a ghost, like he was a nightmare, like he was the answer to 7 years of questions she'd stopped asking because they hurt too much. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she pulled one arm free to cover her mouth, trying to hold back the sound that wanted to escape. "You left," she said, and the accusation carried the weight of every lonely night, every unanswered question, every moment she'd had to be strong enough for two. "You were there, and then you were gone, and I was—" Her voice cracked. Megan pressed against her mother's side, small hands gripping the red silk, looking between them with wide eyes that understood something important was happening even if she couldn't name it. "I was pregnant." The words came out raw, forced through grief that had calcified into anger. "That last night. I didn't know yet, but I was already carrying her. And you vanished like you'd never existed." Hadrian's chest constricted with something that felt catastrophically close to human pain. 3 months later, I woke up screaming. Ellie's free hand moved to her forearm, fingers tracing the bond mark like it still burned. It appeared in the middle of the night. I thought I was dying. The pain it felt like my skin was being carved open from the inside. I went to doctors, dermatologists, anyone who might explain it. No one could. The pattern just existed. Permanent. Identical to yours. She looked down at the mark, then back at him, and her expression shattered into something beyond anger, beyond grief, into the terrible exhaustion of someone who had carried an impossible burden alone for too long. I raised her with this on my skin. Your mark. Every day looking at it and not understanding what it meant. Not understanding why you gave me something and then left me to figure it out by myself. The crowd had grown larger. Someone was definitely filming. Hadrian registered at least 2 other vampires in the gathered shoppers. Word would reach the council within the hour. None of it mattered. "I never meant to leave you," he said quietly, and the admission cost him centuries of carefully maintained control. "I left to protect you." From what? The question came out sharp, disbelieving. Megan looked up at him with those 2 knowing eyes and said, with the casual certainty of a child stating obvious facts, "From the monsters, probably. That's usually why people leave in stories." Hadrian's gaze dropped to the 6-year-old girl standing between them, and for the first time in 347 years, he had absolutely no idea what to say. The truth settled into his bones with the weight of a death sentence and a resurrection happening simultaneously. A daughter. His daughter. The child standing between them wasn't just a brave little girl who had recognized a pattern. She was his blood. His legacy. The impossible result of a love he had tried to bury and a bond mark that had done something no vampire ritual had ever done before, reached across the barrier between mortal and immortal and created life. Hadrian looked at Megan properly for the first time. Really looked. The pale quality to her skin that he had attributed to winter. The unusual steadiness of her gaze that held none of the nervous energy most children radiated around strangers. The way she stood perfectly still in the middle of chaos, watching him with an assessment that seemed far older than 6 years. She had his eyes. Not the color. Those were Ellie's warm brown, but the way she looked at the world. Ancient. Calculating. Missing nothing. The realization hit him like silver through the chest. Half-blood. The word existed in vampire law only as a prohibition, a crime, an abomination that hadn't been permitted to survive in over 2 centuries. The council had exterminated the last known half-blood during his grandfather's reign, citing the unpredictability of mixed heritage, the danger of exposing their world, the fundamental instability of a creature caught between two natures. And he had created one. Without knowing, without choosing, without any ability to protect her from what was coming. Rage flooded through him first, pure, incandescent fury at the 7 years stolen. 7 years of her life he would never get back. First words he hadn't heard. First steps he hadn't witnessed. Birthdays and nightmares and ordinary moments that should have been his right as her father. He had been protecting Ellie from a distance while his child grew up without knowing he existed. The guilt came next, crushing and absolute. He had made Ellie carry this alone. Had marked her with a bond that transformed her body without explanation, that gave her a child who was probably already showing signs of being different, being other, being something the human world couldn't account for and the vampire world would want dead. Then the protective instinct slammed into him with a violence that nearly brought him to his knees. Every vampire in this building, and he could sense 3 now watching from different vantage points, was witnessing the greatest scandal in recent memory. A vampire king with a forbidden half-blood heir. By tomorrow, the council would know. By next week, every rival faction would be strategizing. Some would want Megan destroyed to maintain the purity laws. Others would want her controlled, studied, used as a weapon against him. Over his dead body. Over all their dead bodies. Hadrian knelt, bringing himself to eye level with Megan. The crowd pressed closer, phones capturing the moment, but he didn't care anymore. Let them see. Let them all see. Megan, he said, and her name felt like a vow. How did you know to find me? She tilted her head, considering. I heard your heartbeat. It sounds like mine, different from everyone else's. Slower, like music instead of drums. Ice flooded his veins. She could already hear the difference, could sense other vampires by sound alone. She was manifesting abilities without training, without guidance, without understanding what she was or what dangers came with it. What else can you do? He asked quietly. Megan glanced at her mother, then back at him. Sometimes I see things that haven't happened yet, and I don't like sunlight very much. It makes my skin hurt. Ellie's sharp intake of breath told him she had known, had been watching her daughter develop impossible traits and had no framework to understand them. Hadrian rose slowly, his decision crystallizing into something unshakable. He looked at Ellie, at the tears still streaking her face, at the bond mark that had refused to release her even when he had tried to let go. I need to take you both somewhere safe, he said. Right now. There are people here who will report what they've seen, and when they do, you'll both become targets. Targets for what? Ellie demanded, but her voice shook with the understanding that she already knew the answer. For the same thing I tried to protect you from 7 years ago. He glanced at the watching crowd, at the phones, at the 2 vampires positioned near the exits. The difference is, now I'm not walking away. The shift in the air was subtle, but Hadrian had survived 3 centuries by noticing subtle things. While he knelt before Ellie, still processing the impossible reality of his daughter, his awareness expanded outward through the crowded store with predatory precision. The human shoppers were noise, heartbeats and breathing and the constant shuffle of movement. But beneath that chaos, he felt the unnatural stillness of his own kind. 3 of them. No, 4. The woman near the jewelry counter stood too perfectly motionless, her posture suggesting casual browsing while her attention remained fixed on him with the focus of a hunter watching prey. By the escalators, a man in an expensive coat held his phone at an angle that captured everything, not shopping, not scrolling, documenting. Hadrian's jaw tightened as he registered the 3rd presence near the holiday display, partially obscured by an inflatable Santa, but unmistakably vampire. Old enough to have control. Positioned strategically to block one of the exits. The 4th was the most dangerous. Hidden in the food court entrance, barely within range of his senses, which meant powerful enough to mask their presence from most of their kind. watching, waiting, reporting to someone who mattered. They had seen everything. The reunion, Ellie's tears, the bond mark visible on her arm, Megan's casual revelation about hearing his heartbeat, about seeing things that hadn't happened yet. His secret wasn't just compromised. It was shattered beyond any possibility of repair. Word would reach the council before dawn, probably before midnight. The woman by the jewelry counter had the bearing of someone connected to the European factions. They loved collecting scandals involving the North American territories. The man with the phone could be freelance, selling information to the highest bidder, or directly sworn to one of Hadrian's rivals. Either way, the outcome was the same. By tomorrow, every vampire of consequence would know that Hadrian Talon, Vampire King of the Eastern Territories, had a human-bonded mate he'd hidden for 7 years and a half-blood daughter whose very existence violated laws older than most countries. The political devastation would be immediate and catastrophic. He could already envision the council session, the calls for his removal. The factions who had been waiting for weakness would move against him with surgical precision. And Ellie, marked by a bond that had apparently done something unprecedented, transforming her in ways he didn't fully understand yet, would become either a curiosity to be dissected or a liability to be eliminated. Hadrian had exactly one move that might protect them. He could deny them, right here, right now. Claim he had never seen these people before. Use his authority to compel the human witnesses into confusion about what they had seen. Disappear into the crowd and let Ellie and Megan fade back into anonymous human existence while he dealt with the political fallout alone. It would protect his throne, maintain his power base, give him the resources to shield them from a distance the way he had tried to do before. It would also require him to look his daughter in the eyes and pretend she didn't exist. The bond mark on his forearm burned with phantom heat, responding to Ellie's proximity after 7 years of silence. Megan still held onto her mother's dress, watching him with that unnerving steadiness that said she understood more than a 6-year-old should. The choice crystallized with brutal clarity: his throne or his family, power or truth. The careful life he had built over centuries or the messy, dangerous, impossible realities standing directly in front of him. The vampires in the crowd waited. The phones kept recording. The moment stretched thin. And Hadrian realized, with the weight of 300 years pressing down on a single decision, that he had already made his choice the moment he followed a little girl through a Christmas crowd because she said her mother's mark matched his. Hadrian rose to his full height, and the movement carried a finality that silenced the murmuring crowd. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he reached down and took Megan's hand in his left, Ellie's in his right, the contact sending the bond mark flaring with heat that made Ellie gasp. The intricate black pattern on both their forearms began to glow, faint at first, like embers beneath ash, then brighter, pulsing with a rhythm that matched their connected heartbeats. The human shoppers closest to them stepped back instinctively, phones rising higher, uncertainty rippling through the gathered crowd. "I invoke the right of claiming under the old laws," Hadrian said, his voice cutting through the mall's ambient noise with unnatural clarity. The words were ancient, formal, spoken in English but carrying a weight that transcended language. "Ellie Walters is my bonded mate, marked by sacred right and bound by blood magic. Megan is my daughter and recognized heir." The vampire by the jewelry counter went rigid. The man near the escalator lowered his phone slowly, his expression shifting from curiosity to shock. Hadrian continued, directing his words to the hidden observers even as human witnesses recorded what they couldn't fully understand. "Any action taken against them is an action taken against me. Any threat to their safety is a declaration of war against my bloodline. This claim is witnessed and irrevocable." The air around them seemed to thicken, pressure building like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. The bond marks blazed brighter, no longer just glowing but radiating light that cast strange shadows across Ellie's face. "Hadrian, what's happening?" Ellie's words cut off as the transformation mark sent visible pulses beneath her skin, tracing patterns that spread beyond the original seal. Her knees buckled, and he caught her against him, feeling the wild surge of magic responding to the formal invocation. Then Megan made a sound, half gasp, half something else entirely. The girl's eyes had gone completely black, pupils swallowing iris and white until they reflected nothing but darkness. Every light in their immediate vicinity flickered, the overhead fluorescence dimming as if something was draining the electricity directly from the fixtures. The crowd's murmurs turned to alarmed voices. Someone screamed. Megan's feet lifted slightly off the ground, her pink dress floating around her as if suspended in water rather than air. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that no human child's voice should possess, layered, resonant, ancient. "I see them," she said, her black eyes fixed on the vampire near the escalator. "The ones who are watching. The ones who want to hurt us." Her head turned with unnatural smoothness toward the jewelry counter. "That one is already calling someone, telling them we're here." Objects on nearby shelves began to rattle. A display of ornaments shattered, glass cascading to the floor in a glittering wave. Hadrian pulled both Ellie and Megan closer, his own nature rising to the surface in response to his daughter's uncontrolled power. His eyes shifted, the careful glamour he maintained slipping as predatory instinct overrode centuries of discipline. The platinum of his hair seemed to catch light that wasn't there, and his skin took on a luminescence that marked him as fundamentally other. The vampire observers weren't hiding anymore. They stood visible now, separated from the human crowd by their absolute stillness, bearing witness to something that would reshape vampire politics for generations. A vampire king publicly claiming a half-blood heir. A human woman glowing with transformation magic she couldn't control. A 6-year-old child demonstrating raw power that most adult vampires couldn't manifest. The declaration was complete. The damage was done. And there was no going back. The doorway existed in a place most humans walked past 1,000 times without seeing. Hadrian led them down 3 blocks from the mall, through streets still decorated with Christmas lights, past cafes closing for the evening. Ellie clutched Megan against her side, both of them trembling. Though whether from cold or shock or the aftereffects of what had happened in the store, Hadrian couldn't tell. He stopped in front of what appeared to be a condemned office building, its windows dark and boarded, a faded, "No trespassing" sign barely visible in the streetlight. "This is where you live." Ellie's voice carried disbelief and something close to hysteria. "This is where the entrance is." Hadrian placed his palm against the brick beside the locked door, and the bond mark on his forearm flared. The wall rippled like water disturbed by a stone, reality bending around his touch. A door appeared where none had existed, tall, ancient wood-bound with iron that predated modern metalwork. It swung inward silently, revealing darkness so complete it seemed solid. Megan stared into that darkness without fear. "It's singing," she whispered. Hadrian glanced down at her sharply. "You can hear it? It sounds like home." She pulled free from Ellie's grip and stepped through the threshold before either of them could stop her. Ellie lunged after her daughter, and Hadrian caught her arm. "It won't hurt her. It recognizes her blood." "Recognizes? What are you talking about?" But Ellie was already moving forward, maternal instinct overriding terror, and Hadrian followed them both into the space between worlds. The passage felt like walking through cold water. Pressure built against Hadrian's skin, testing, tasting, confirming his right to pass. For Ellie, the transition was harsher. She gasped, stumbling, and he steadied her as the realm's magic crashed against her partially transformed physiology. Then they were through. The vampire realm unfolded before them in layers of shadow and architectural impossibility. They stood in what appeared to be a massive underground plaza, though underground didn't quite capture it. The space existed sideways from normal geography, carved from darkness itself. Gothic arches soared overhead, supporting a ceiling that seemed to breathe. Bioluminescent fungi grew in deliberate patterns along the walls, casting pale blue light that illuminated without warming. Figures moved through the space with predatory grace. Vampires, dozens of them, going about their business in a city that existed beneath and beside the human world. Some glanced toward the newcomers with casual curiosity. Others stopped entirely, recognition dawning as they registered who had just arrived. Ellie made a sound caught between awe and terror. This is real. All of this is real. 7 years ago, I told you I had to leave. Hadrian kept his voice low, aware of how many ears were suddenly paying attention. This is why. This world has rules, laws, and I broke most of them by loving you. The bond mark on Ellie's arm pulsed, responding to the concentrated magic in the air. She looked down at it, watching the black lines writhe beneath her skin like living things. What's it doing to me? The question came out raw. I've felt it changing me for years. Sometimes I wake up and my reflection looks wrong. My teeth feel sharper. I can smell things I shouldn't be able to smell. Hadrian's expression darkened. The bond mark wasn't designed for humans. It's rewriting your biology. Slowly. Without control or guidance. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. If we don't stabilize the transformation soon, your human body will reject the changes. The process will tear you apart from the inside. Ellie's face went bloodless. How soon? Months. Maybe less. Megan had wandered several feet away, tilting her head back to stare at the impossible architecture above them. Her eyes, back to normal brown now, tracked movement in the shadows that Ellie couldn't see. She pointed upward to where something large and winged circled near the ceiling. There's a creature up there. It has 3 hearts. I can hear all of them beating different rhythms. Several nearby vampires exchanged glances. One, an elderly woman in clothes that looked centuries old, approached slowly. The child hears the gargoyle's hearts. Her voice carried the texture of forgotten languages. From this distance? She's learning quickly, Hadrian said, the words both proud and concerned. Megan turned in a slow circle, wonder replacing fear. Everything is so clear here. It's not dark at all. It's full of colors. She looked at her mother. Can you see them, Mommy? The purple lights in the walls? The way the air moves like water. Ellie shook her head mutely. You will, the elderly vampire said, not unkindly. When the transformation completes. If you survive it. The summons arrived before they had been in the realm for an hour. A messenger appeared in Hadrian's residential chamber, a stark space of black stone and minimal furnishing that Ellie stared at with barely concealed horror. The messenger wore the silver insignia of the Council of Elders, his expression carefully neutral as he delivered the formal order. The council convenes at midnight. Your presence is required. Alone. Hadrian's jaw tightened. Tell them I'll bring my family. The summons specifies. I heard what it specified. Hadrian's voice dropped to something dangerous. Tell them I invoke the right of witness judgment. If they're going to condemn my bloodline, they'll do it to our faces. The messenger hesitated, then bowed and vanished with preternatural speed. Ellie sank onto the edge of a chair that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of obsidian. What happens at midnight? They decide whether we live or die. Hadrian said it plainly, seeing no point in softening the truth. The council has absolute authority over matters of law. What I've done, the bond, Megan's existence, these aren't minor infractions. Megan sat cross-legged on the floor, running her fingers over the stone as if reading something in its texture. They're scared of me, she said quietly. I can feel it. Everyone we passed in that big room was scared. They should be, muttered a voice from the doorway. Hadrian turned to find John Casimir leaning against the frame, An old ally, though ally was a generous term in vampire politics. John had survived 4 regime changes by being useful to whoever held power. Words already spreading, John continued, entering uninvited. A half-blood child who can sense gargoyles from 100 feet away, who made the lights in a human mall flicker with untrained emotion. The conservatives want her destroyed before she becomes a threat. The progressives want to study her. And the opportunists, he smiled without warmth, want to figure out how to use her against you. Ellie said, her voice shaking with fury. She's a child, not a political weapon. She's both, John replied, not unkindly. Welcome to our world, where people stop being innocent the moment they develop useful abilities. Hadrian moved between John and his family, a subtle repositioning that spoke volumes. What's the mood in the council? Divided. Catastrophically so. John counted on his fingers. The European contingent is calling for your removal from power. The Asian territories are remaining neutral, waiting to see which way the wind blows. The African elders are intrigued. Apparently, they have legends about successful half-bloods from centuries past before the purges. And the North American faction? Your own territory? John's expression turned grim. Split. About half support you out of loyalty or fear. The other half smell blood in the water and are already positioning themselves to take your throne. The conversation was interrupted by Megan's sudden intake of breath. She had pressed her palm flat against the stone floor, her eyes distant. They're gathering, she whispered, in a room shaped like a circle, deep below this one. 13 of them. Old. So old their hearts barely beat. Her gaze focused on Hadrian. One of them wants to hurt you. His anger tastes like metal. John stared at the child. She can sense the council chambers from here? Through warded stone. Apparently. Hadrian knelt beside his daughter. Can you tell which one wants to hurt me? Megan tilted her head, concentrating. The one who sits in the east position. He keeps thinking about fire, about how fast things burn. Damien, John breathed. Of course. He challenged your predecessor for the throne and lost. If you fall, he'll make his move again. Hadrian stood, decision crystallizing. Then we don't give him the satisfaction. He looked at Ellie. When we enter that chamber, they'll try to intimidate you. Ignore it. They'll call Megan an abomination. Don't react. The moment you show fear, they'll use it against us. Ellie pulled Megan close. And if they decide to act anyway, then they'll have to go through me first. Hadrian's eyes shifted, the predator rising to the surface. And I've been king long enough to know where every elder keeps their secrets. If they want a war, they'll get one that burns their legacies to ash. John let out a low whistle. Mutually assured destruction. Bold strategy. It's not a strategy, Hadrian said quietly. It's a promise. The council chamber was exactly as Megan had described, circular, carved from stone so old it predated written language, with 13 throne-like chairs arranged in a perfect arc. Each elder sat in shadow, their faces barely visible in the dim bioluminescent light that pulsed from veins in the rock itself. Hadrian entered with Ellie on one side and Megan on the other, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He felt every eye tracking their movement, felt the weight of centuries of tradition pressing down like physical force. The eldest, a woman whose age was impossible to determine, spoke first. Hadrian Talon, you stand accused of breaking sacred law. How do you answer? Guilty, he said simply, of loving beyond what law permits, of creating life where tradition forbids it, and of choosing family over politics. A murmur rippled through the council. Damien leaned forward from his eastern seat, his voice sharp with barely controlled anger. You admit your crimes so easily? I admit the truth. Whether it's criminal depends on which laws you value more, the ones written in fear or the ones written in our oldest histories. Hadrian's gaze swept the chamber. The African elders know the stories. Before the purges, before the purity laws, there were others like my daughter. Half-bloods who bridged both worlds and made us stronger for it. An elder in the southern position, one of the African representatives, inclined her head slightly. The legends exist, though whether they speak truth or cautionary tale remains debated. Then let me offer evidence instead of legend. Hadrian placed his hand on Megan's shoulder. My daughter possesses abilities that pureblood children take decades to develop. She can sense through warded stone. She can hear what most of us cannot. She represents evolution, not contamination. She represents chaos, Damien countered. Unpredictable power in an untrained child. You ask us to ignore centuries of law based on potential. I ask you to see what's standing in front of you instead of what you fear. Megan, who had been silent until now, looked up at the council with those unsettlingly direct eyes. I can show you, she said quietly, if you want to know what I am. The chamber went still. The eldest elder gestured permission. Show us, child. Megan closed her eyes. The bioluminescent veins in the stone began to pulse faster, responding to something in her presence. Then, slowly, patterns of light began to form in the air around her, constellations that shifted and moved, mapping connections between every vampire in the chamber. Threads of luminescence stretched between individuals, showing bloodlines, allegiances, old debts, and older grudges. She opened her eyes, and they glowed with soft silver light. I can see how you're all connected. Who owes whom? Who's lying about their loyalty? Her gaze fixed on Damien. And who's planning to challenge Hadrian the moment he's weakened, even though you swore an oath of neutrality 3 decades ago? The threads of light around Damien pulsed red. The chamber erupted. Accusations flew. Damien rose from his seat, fury and fear warring on his ancient features, but 3 other elders were already calling for his explanation of the broken oath. In the chaos, the eldest elder's voice cut through like a blade. Enough. Silence fell instantly. She studied Megan with an expression that might have been wonder or concern or both. The child sees true. A gift we thought lost to time. Her attention shifted to Hadrian. You may keep your throne and your family on one condition. Hadrian's jaw tightened. Name it. The girl trains here, under our supervision. If she is to exist in our world, she must understand its rules, its dangers, its responsibilities. And her mother? Hadrian's hand found Ellie's, their bond marks flaring in unison. The transformation is already too far progressed to reverse. She completes it or she dies. The elder's gaze softened slightly. Help her survive it, Hadrian. We have lost enough to fear and tradition. 3 months later, Ellie stood in Hadrian's fortress, a sprawling estate built into a mountainside that existed in both the human and vampire realms simultaneously. She looked at her reflection in a window that showed stars impossible to see from Earth's surface, examining eyes that now held flecks of silver, skin that had lost its final traces of human warmth. The transformation had nearly killed her twice. Hadrian had guided her through each agonizing stage, teaching her to accept rather than fight what the bond mark was making her become. She wasn't fully vampire. Something in her humanity had merged with the magic rather than being consumed by it. She was something new, something unprecedented. In the courtyard below, Megan trained with an elderly instructor, learning to control the abilities that manifested unpredictably, learning when to trust her visions and when to question them, learning to be powerful without being destructive. Hadrian joined Ellie at the window, slipping his arm around her waist. Regrets. She leaned into him, feeling the bond mark hum contentedly at their proximity. Ask me again in another 7 years. Below them, Megan laughed at something her instructor said, the sound bright and achingly normal despite everything that surrounded it. They had survived the council, survived the transformation, survived the impossible circumstances that should have destroyed them. But Hadrian felt the political currents shifting in the realm, felt the eyes still watching, the factions still maneuvering. Damien had been censured but not removed. The European contingent accepted the ruling, but didn't support it. "It's not over," Ellie said quietly, reading his tension. "No," he agreed. "But we face it together now." Megan looked up and waved at them, her smile radiant in the starlight. A child caught between two worlds, powerful and vulnerable, dangerous and innocent. The daughter that love and fate had conspired to create against every law and tradition. Hadrian waved back, and for the first time in 347 years, felt something he had almost forgotten: hope that the future might be worth the fight. If you believe that love can defy even the oldest laws and that family is worth fighting for, then like and share this tale of impossible love, because stories like this deserve to be remembered. And subscribe to our channel. Your support keeps these stories alive.